Welcome everyone to Jewish Community Action's event. We Teach Us Safe. This event has been in the works for a while now, a couple of months, and then probably a little longer before that with the bouncing of ideas that Isa and I have been doing for a while. Hi everyone, my name is Brandon Schorsch. My pronouns are he, him. I'm Jewish Community Action's Combating Hate organizer. And I've been doing this for a few years now. And Jewish Community Action, for those who are new to us, we are based out of the Twin Cities in Minnesota, and we are a community action group. We do a lot of work in the realms of housing justice and economic justice and like serious reform to our criminal justice system, which does not really deliver justice in any measure or respect. Let alone rehabilitation at this time. And Jewish Community Action in the last few years has also been expanding our work into talking about not just anti-Semitism, but white nationalism and growing extremism and fascism. So yeah, we've gotten into the Antifa business. And I also want to make sure that we thank some of our wonderful co-hosts, which include Jews for Racial and Economic Justice, Jews United for Justice, Carolina Jews for Justice, Jewish Council of Urban Affairs, and the Jewish Alliance of Legal. I forgot JALSA's entire abbreviation, but they're wonderful too. We have so many wonderful co-hosts, and if you can tell, there's a real justice-y theme going on. But I also, we couldn't have this event if it weren't for our wonderful panelists. So I'd love to go and pass it along to them so they can introduce themselves. So without further ado, we'll start with Isa.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for having me, Brandon, JCA, and all of our incredible co-hosts. It's really a joy to be here and to see everybody come into the Zoom room. I'm Isa, she, her. I'm a writer for Hyperallergic for an art magazine. I teach interior design history and art history, and I look at the intersections between art and design and politics, specifically on how we can combat white supremacy and classism, et cetera, in art and design. And recently, hold on, yes, just introducing ourselves right now. Sorry. Yes, and so very excited again to be joined by these two amazing content creators as well.
I will jump in. Yes, echoing everything Isa just said, thank you so much for having me here today. Super excited for this conversation and to be in dialogue with you all. It's going to be great. By way of brief introduction, my name is Raven Schwab Curtis. I use they and she pronouns, and I'm a full-time content creator on TikTok and Instagram, trying to be on YouTube. We'll see how that goes. Long form content is a whole nother beast, TBD. But yeah, I mean, a lot of the stuff that I talk about online is around being Black and Jewish and queer and exploring intersectionality as it pertains to our community. So hopefully I can bring some of that perspective to our conversation today.
I'm Sim Kern, my pronouns are they, them. I'm primarily an author. I'll have my 4th book coming out this summer, fiction. I mostly write science fiction. And I'm also an environmental journalist here in Houston. I've, been on Twitter and TikTok are my primary platforms and also Instagram as an author, but in my research, I started researching early modern Jewish history for a book, my next book that I'm working on, and just kind of started sharing what I was learning about early modern Jewish history, which I really didn't know much about before I started doing the research online, and got to experience many of the common experiences that these two have had as being a content creator who talks about Jewish history and Jewish issues.
All right. Well, thank you all so much for being here. And one thing that I want to make sure that everybody listening tonight and watching later on knows and thinks about throughout JCA's programming around our anti-hate content, I really love to go and make sure that we're learning and talking about online culture and how it's not one fixed point in time, like 2016. It is fluid, and it has been building over many years, including before it went worldwide, and it was still just like telecom nets and things like that. But one thing about the four of us is that I kind of noticed that each of us are from different micro generations in terms of the way in which we interacted with the internet, which might sound like something very alien to folks who did not really grow up with the internet, folks who were adults already when the internet was released. But all of us were at different stages of life when the internet became far more accessible. So I'd love to know, what was your first online community? What was the first spot that you really was like, this is my place online? Yeah.
You're gonna force me to reveal my age, Brandon. I believe I'm the elder here. So my first online community would be MySpace.
Same.
And then I was also a contemporary of Mark Zuckerberg's at Harvard my freshman year when he created Facebook. So I was actually I was like one of the first, 100 people or something to sign up for Facebook, which is what a long, strange journey that's been.
Whoa. I'll say I first joined Facebook. Think that was the first online community that I joined. But I'm an exact zillennial. I was born in December 1996, so I'm like right on the cusp. And I really feel like I'm both. That's my lived experience. But anyway, in the weird way, my first real online community though that I felt was on TikTok. That was where I first felt the excitement of I really connecting with other people. No other platform really did that for me. And more recently Instagram. Now that I've been able to connect with more people there, and they're very different environments. But that was the first place that I felt like I really got to nerd out about stuff, which is my favorite thing to do. So yeah.
I guess I'll be showing my age on here today as well. As the baby of the group, I guess I'm considered firmly Gen Z. I'm 24, so yep, showing my cards. I would say the first online community that I really delved into was Club Penguin, which, if I'm not mistaken, is still up and running. They've had a couple iterations. They were shut down and then it was recreated, shut down and recreated. Anyways, Club Penguin is just a virtual world where everyone's a penguin and you play games together. Sounds ludicrous, but it's really fun. And I used to go to the pizza parlor and make friends and talk to people from around the world. So that was my first community online.
I love that. And yeah, I was thinking I was probably on Facebook the longest. But then Sim, you have me beat. I was an 06 adopter when they initially released it to high school students. And I was in that first crop of high school students. But yeah, so the internet's changed a lot over the years, and there's a lot of different places on it. For people who don't use, I'm just going to go with the main app that I know all three of you from. For people who don't use TikTok, it's more than the dancing app. We all know that. But how do you end up getting into places where you are encountering educational TikTok? A lot of people don't necessarily see those spots. So how did you first find those places? Did it kind of start as more of a lurker? I to use online lingo, is it more you were consuming content first, or were you just putting your thing your content out there and seeing where it landed?
For me, it was the latter, and that's what connected me to Issa, actually. So I joined TikTok as an author. My primary goal is to gain a readership and sell my books, quite transparently. But I ended up, and I tried to follow trends, but I'm actually very bad at promoting my book. And I just wanted to talk about what I was really interested in, which was all these things that I was learning about early modern Jewish history. So I ended up just making little videos about that sort of thing. And then those ended up being way more successful than anything I tried to do, chasing trends or trying to promote my own books. And then I guess the algorithm must have, seen the things that I was tagging my video. So I would tag my videos like Jewish history. And then I would start to be shown other videos under the hashtag Jewish history. So that's one way to find, if you want to learn Jewish history, you can go on to, or see what's being put out there about Jewish history. You can search the hashtag.
I would say I was kind of the flip-flop. You know, I started consuming and then creating. And it's funny too, because within Gen Z, I feel like there's almost this bifurcation. Like before 2020, like older Gen Z members saw TikTok, formerly Musical.ly, as like this goofy thing that like young kids were doing. We would never be caught dead like on this app, right? And then you have younger Gen Z folks who are kind of paving the way for Musical.ly, soon to become TikTok. And then 2020 hits, and of course, we're all home because of the pandemic. And you see this sort of mass cultural shift across generations, but definitely within Gen Z. I feel like people more in my category of Gen Z were like, all right, maybe there's something to this. So that's kind of when I arrived to TikTok, started consuming, you know, a lot of content to, as we all were doing, distract myself from what was happening in the world. And I think as a scholar, you know, I've been in academia my whole life. I just finished my master's degree at Northwestern. I think I always just gravitate towards stuff that makes me think deeply about the world that I inhabit. And so I ended up on that side of TikTok and, you know, kind of realized that I had something to contribute to the conversation. So that's how it started for me.
Yeah. Similarly, I also was definitely a lurker, I think for at least a year. In like 2020, like was trying to distract myself from the horrors of everything that was happening in the world and in Philadelphia. I don't remember what accounts, and I think it was like that thing where the thing about that makes TikTok so successful as an app is that it shows you the content that you're interested in. So you'll go down those rabbit holes, which is, you know, has its good sides and bad sides, because it also means it creates a literal alt-right pipeline for people like very easily. But on the good side, I got introduced to like all of these creators that were like just teaching me things I just never knew about and like were just blowing my mind. I think some that like I think I saw immediately were the Vlasta, who did like Russian folk magic, who does Russian folk magic and like Russian, the Ersia culture that she's from, which is an indigenous Russian culture. And then the other, I think probably, oh my gosh, I'm Diamond Dog, who is an indigenous, who is an indigenous historian. I think those were like two of like the influences that I saw, where they were just kind of straight telling people like the facts of what they learned and what they thought more people should know about. But it was one of those things where I was like, I'll just try it out, because my main area of study is ornament, which is like very weird and niche until you get into it, and then like everybody has a way of connecting to it. So I didn't think that, like, I thought that everybody was like, no one could possibly care about this except for me. And what was really cool, being able to like show it to people and then find out that people do actually think it's a cool topic. So it's a great place for, it has a way of connecting people together in a way that like, it's harder on other apps.
So when you y'all came into these different online spaces in different ways, for people who don't make TikToks, who don't create content, I don't create content. The moment that video content was kind of introduced, that's kind of when I dropped off. Like it kind of overwhelmed me. Really, I guess I'm one of those millennials who's like, the moment my smartphone became a smartphone, I use it as a glorified like flip phone for a long time, and just like didn't really use the full thread of all the apps. So what is it like actually like producing video content? Because I think most of us on this call tonight probably at most probably tweet or post on Facebook, a lot of written content, or post images on Instagram. So what is it like making a video, especially a historic or educational video where you're trying to get across a message in a very short time?
I mean, you know, I think it's more labor intensive than anyone would believe, because when we're talking about platforms like TikTok, this is a short form platform. So everything you're seeing is like 15, 30, 60 seconds. I think it can be a little bit longer now, but especially when the app first started, I believe it was up to 10 seconds. And so that as an educator is kind of a unique challenge to figure out how to communicate a very complex idea in a super short amount of time. And I think what that means is when we're doing the work of outlining and scripting a video, we have to be really, really intentional about what we share, how we share it, and how we combine sort of the audio and visual elements of that 60-second thing to communicate a big idea that probably merits a whole semester worth of class. So, in terms of affectively, what that feels like for me, I gain a lot of joy by being able to communicate these big ideas in a short amount of time, because I know folks are living faster lives than ever before, particularly in this, moment of late stage capitalism. And so being able to have those conversations, even if they're brief, is worthwhile.
Yeah, it's hard. Definitely, like, this is one of the challenges it is like fun. It's kind of like a puzzle. I think sometimes it's kind of like, as Raven was saying, where it's like, you do have to, especially when it comes to Jewish topics, which are like always really complicated, and you're going to be telling them probably to a majority non-Jewish audience, and kind of trying to say something in a way that's helpful and not hurtful in some way. Like, one of the things that I realized about, like, after you have like enough hiccups, like as a content creator, you start to realize like, oh, like I have to write a video with the knowledge that like there's a possibility, if not a great possibility, but there's a possibility it'll be seen by thousands and thousands of people. And like, what would it look like if this was seen by thousands and thousands of people? Like, what might they say about it? Which has like its good side and its bad side, because it's like, on one hand, you can like, make your content as accessible as possible. And so you can make these like complicated topics really simple and like here for people to understand. I think as we all know, it's not an easy task, but it can be really fun. And on the other hand, it's like, it can also, I know for me, like cause me to get too cautious. Like, I'll start everything like with like a disclaimer, like, I don't mean to be saying this, but I'm saying this, to the point where like it started to come into my writing. Like, I'm putting a disclaimer in everything, and my partner helps me like edits all of my things. And sometimes it's like, that's like a note, like, you don't have to explain yourself. Like some people are reasonable, and you have to like, come away with the, it's like a little, so it can be challenging on a lot of different ends. But looking at it like a kind of like a puzzle can make it fun.
I totally agree with everything the other two have said. I will say Raven's videos are like so much more polished than my content. Both of y'all, your content is so much more polished. I'm usually just like using I'm just talking at my phone. I don't use any like fancy effects or anything. And I've been surprised that you really can go viral on TikTok just for sharing your ideas. Like, you don't necessarily need to have the more polished videos, although it's amazing when you can. I just don't have those skills. But I'm also having, I'm having kind of a week of it, to be honest, because I had a video go viral, which is always a blessing and a curse. And it was a video about Jewish history that went viral this week and is related to stuff in the US, which I think we're going to talk about later. So I won't talk about it too much now. But going viral for a video like that's controversial and also Jewish, it's just always a lot. You're going to get a lot of feedback. And it can be really heavy. I actually prefer it when like my videos do like middling well, because then the people who are seeing it are people who've seen one or two of my other videos before. They have more context on who I am and where I'm coming from, and that I'm a decent person, when you have a video that gets past like 100,000 views, then those people are encountering you and your face and your message for the very first time, lacking all context. And so, like Isa says, you kind of have to plan every video with that in mind. And sometimes you fail, and sometimes, people aren't the most generous. So
yeah. There's literally times when it's like, I have a video go viral and I'm like, okay, but that's missing the context, and I've just taken it down, because it's like, if too many people see this idea is too unpolished at the moment, like, if there's too many people see it, like, they're not gonna get it. I'm like, no, I'm just gonna go away from that. And what, like at a certain point, and I'm sure we'll talk a lot more about this, but like you stop, you kind of stop, but you kind of don't stop being shocked at the things that people will think of to say. Cause like when you see that much of the face of like people on the internet, it's just like you have the thing that my friend told me that helps me a lot in kind of combating it and like my shock is like people will say anything. Like you can just expect that like anyone will have just the most like bananas idea or bananas thing to say. Like people will literally say like people will say anything. Like it's just even in a it feels like a surreal world sometimes. Yeah.
Well, you all started to broach into that another one of the topics I really wanted to talk about, which is that those lines where we cross, like we see either organized mass harassment or we just see lots of bad faith context collapse where people turn everything into intense binaries. It sounds like it really affects all of your content before it even hits the screen. How does TikTok compare to other websites? Does having somebody's face there seem to change the nature in which people do things? I know at least when I'm thinking about things like, gosh, when there's somebody on the other end of the screen on something like Twitter, it seems even more distant, less personal. I recall the great flame wars of like 2014 through 2016, like Gamergate and the refugee crisis when it was hitting peaks in 2015, and then Brexit. There were so many of these huge moments where the apps where you weren't seeing another person's face, where you didn't necessarily know somebody, became known as exceptionally toxic. How does Twitter compare? How does TikTok compare?
Also coming from Twitter. So I only joined TikTok like under great duress, like the day Elon Musk bought Twitter. I was like, all right, I'm out. Or at least I thought I need to, build a platform somewhere else because my primary platform had been on Twitter and it was clear he was going to sink that ship, which he is. So, yeah, I think Twitter was far more toxic from what I've seen. Like Twitter, like book Twitter compared to book talk, the amount of like pylons that happened and I don't know, just really inter-community tearing each other down. There was more of that on Twitter, but I'm starting to see it also on TikTok, just as I'm kind of getting deeper into it. But I do think the fact that you've seen these people faces and heard them talking, that over time, there's more of a relationship and you're less likely to just absolutely go after someone in the way I think it was pretty easy to on Twitter. I've also found it almost impossible, and I've pretty much stopped talking about Jewish history whatsoever on Twitter. There are so many bots. There is such a larger, I don't know if there's a larger far-right hate presence on Twitter, but it is much easier for them to find you. I think the TikTok algorithm does a better job keeping, leftists and, people who are progressive in their bubbles and then far-right people in their bubbles. And so they don't seem to find me immediately and dogpile me on TikTok the way they tend to on Twitter.
So I started out on TikTok. I didn't have I actually don't have a strong grounding in Twitter at all. So I'm glad, Sim, that you can speak to that. I think the comparison that I can bring to the table is kind of thinking about Instagram and TikTok in tandem. And, for me, I have noticed that TikTok is way less toxic when it comes to anti-Semitism, anti-Black racism, homophobia, than Instagram. Like the amount of harassment and hate that I receive on Instagram has kind of gotten to such a point that I don't even really look at my comments after the first 15 minutes anymore, because it's a lot, like literally having people DM me and like call me the K word and like a gorilla. And I'm just like, oh, I think a lot of times when we talk about intersectionality, we speak about it almost as like a synonym for diversity, equity, and inclusion, or like for what diversity means. Like, oh, we're super intersectional, right? Like there's this positing as this deeply positive thing. And that can definitely be one aspect of how we engage intersectionality, though it's way more than just diversity. I think that's a watering down. I think when we talk about intersectionality, we also really have to be attentive to the way that subjugation and oppression can be and is deeply intersectional. And, if someone's coming for me because I'm Black, they're probably also coming for me because I'm Jewish. And I literally see that reflected in the comments in real time. And definitely, just a lot of, trolls, I think, come with the online space, unfortunately. But oftentimes when I do see this hate in my comments, on the rare occasion where I go there after like the first 15 minutes, it's literally an account where you go to it and it was created like 5 days ago. And like there are all these sort of indicators that they're a troll. So I don't know, it's really interesting. I think for better or for worse, I've become pretty desensitized to a lot of that hate simply by virtue of being exposed to it a lot. But it is, a part of the territory for Jewish creators, multiracial, Black, et cetera, creators who exist at these intersectional indices.
Yeah. It's interesting because like there's a lot of things that TikTok that like there's a lot of good parts of like seeing somebody's face and have them tell a story. There's also like some like drawbacks definitely as well, where like, for example, like I think there's like TikTok will rate you on your attractiveness and like how like your videos often will do better if you're considered attractive. And they do that in like usually like very racist and ableist ways, specifically. And so there's like one like, and I have like a friend who like like was called snaggletooth, like a lot of stuff like that, and like is having like a harder time, like, and they feel like it's because of their teeth, and like it's because they're having a harder time getting their point across to people, because like people first of all will not listen to them, and then second of all the algorithm definitely like sees what it considers like an imperfection and like will downplay those videos. And so like, so that's one on like the one hand, and then like on the other hand, there is something very neat and totally different about TikTok that allows us to like tell stories, or like just like engage in story in like long form, like it's short form, but in some ways it's long form storytelling. And there's been some cool stuff said that I've heard about like how popular it got specifically during the pandemic, when we were yearning so much for that per like face-to-face connection, that you could get that there was this app came up where it was like literally like sitting down and talking with somebody through your phone. And that was a part of what attracted so many people to it. And that's where I feel like on another end, I feel like I got to like one of, I think my biggest like learning curve, or like biggest, like I knew nothing about like Indigenous history, Indigenous rights, like just literally nothing before coming onto this app, and like having like people like from Native communities like just literally just tell me like what's going on with Line 3, like what's like this thing in my culture, like what like this is, all this type of stuff, like that couldn't really happen in the same way on other apps. And that's just one example of many, but I think it's like it speaks a little bit to the power of storytelling, that I think that like these topics are talked about in a way that they have been talked about before, especially in there's like some like Tumblr conversations that get repeated, especially on TikTok, and that's a phenomenon that a lot of people point to, but I think it's actually much more evolved and advanced than that. And there's conversations that we're having that I don't think have happened before, and have happened before, and that's pretty exciting. Yeah. And then on the other hand too, like can speak a lot to, I have a weird like array of different topics that I talk about, which brings out a lot of people from different communities. And so it's really interesting to see like which communities are the most openly hateful or the most openly anti-Semitic, and which communities will do it in are the same level maybe, or like are also hateful and anti-Semitic in different ways, but have like a different way of phrasing it. So that's been a really interesting thing to see. Yeah. There's nothing like a British white supremacist. They're very bold. I'll just say that. They're very bold.
All right. Well, gosh, y'all are touching on so many different topics where I'm like, all right, we're still great. We still have so much time to keep talking. Um, and I know I keep asking about much more of what it's like for your personal experiences on an app. And we're talking less about your content right now. But I'm really like, one, I'm personally curious. And I also imagine that a lot of folks on here tonight probably have never had this opportunity to hear directly from people who do um, anything like this. So couple of things that y'all had just mentioned, and I was writing them down as we went. So this is really a spitballed question here. So like Issa, you talked a little bit about like what it's like to end up on the wrong side of TikTok. And for people who don't use TikTok, I'm going to explain this. It's so if you feed the algorithm the wrong things, the algorithm's just making predictions based off of if you liked something or how long you watched something, and it's going to spit information out to you, assuming that you might also like that. It's a whole series of if-then statements. One thing I want, like I'd love to go and tell people is that like artificial intelligence, it's artificial, but it's not really intelligent. It is just built off of tons and tons and tons and tons and tons of scraped if-then statements. It's just a giant probability machine that has the appearance of being intelligent. So when you end up on that wrong side of TikTok, do you find that it's content that you interacted with that did that, or you a slip of a wrong hashtag? If that question interests y'all less, I also have questions about parasocial relationships. So that's a doozy too.
No, this is really, really important. But this is, and I love that this is a difficult, it took me a long time to realize there were like different sides of TikTok. And it's true, like, and especially because like, especially there's like a far left and a far right. Like there is definitely, those are what we think of them. Of course, there's like a lot of in-betweens, but because TikTok like kind of prizes really extreme content, or like content that just like goes as far, not just like always extreme, but like content that takes it into a far zone. That's I think how people how people often talk about it, as like these two different sides. And I think that, yeah, it can be like the slip of the wrong hashtag, but I think because TikTok it's because the algorithm does so much to keep you within your community most of the time. Like they'll show my videos, to people who would like my type of content. So they'll show my videos usually to people who would like, leftist stuff and generally leftist stuff. And as well as design history, etc. But I think so in that way, I think the most common way that my videos get the most attention from people that do not like me is when it's shared somewhere. I think it's usually like when it's shared on Twitter to like a really big account that's like a far right account, for example. So like the times that I've gotten the most hate is when I was posted on Libs of TikTok, which is like a very notorious far, like people say right, but it's like far, far, far right. Twitter account with like many, many, many hundreds of like, I don't know, hundreds of thousands or tens of thousands of followers that post videos of things that they think are like ridiculous leftist takes. And you'll get a lot of attention and a lot of people like spewing hate in your comments after that. But then I think there are other ways too that it can explode. And like sometimes if you put in a hashtag that like is relatively neutral, like hashtag archaeology, or like hashtag European history, for example, that can definitely go anywhere. So it's always very surprising to see like sometimes it's not surprising, because like I recently made a video about like toxic masculinity. So like that makes sense that like a lot of like men that, are coming from like sort of toxic, like online platforms, like will find that. But there was also like one about, like I made a video about how, the English people did not steal an obelisk from Egypt, but they took it in a way that I don't think was that cool. And that was one that like got like a lot of this was like referencing the British anti-Semites or the British white supremacists who are just like way more bold than any other group I had interact with. They were the ones that were the most like throwing around slurs, both for like the people that England colonized, and to me, like that was like one of the times where I haven't, and honestly, like on the whole, this doesn't happen that often. But that's the time where I got comments like about my nose, like, you know, they should send you to like hope that the ovens feel good, or like, you know, stuff like really like dark, nasty stuff. And that was like shocking. So I was like, that this feels like a video. Sometimes like it's videos about architecture that's like, how did it get here? I think it just becomes popular in those zones where people share it around with each other. Anyway, those are a couple, but sometimes it's just hard to tell where people are coming from, like link wise. Yeah.
Yeah, there is the ability to not allow stitches and duets on TikTok, which is where other people can share your video and either react alongside of it, or they can excerpt a little clip of it, take it out of context, and then say whatever they want to say, or say that you were saying, which you might not have even been saying. So utilizing that tool. So someone asked, like, how do you get off the wrong side of TikTok? Utilizing that tool is really important if you're being stitched and duetted by a lot of bad faith creators. And sometimes the best thing is to you can private the video without deleting it. Like if the heat is too much, you can kind of private it and kind of just shut down and ride it out until that ire and that focus moves on, and then post something sort of unrelated. And then I think that can kind of shake them off. I think also it's important to note, like, just that Chaya Raichik, who created Libs of TikTok, is Jewish. And sometimes I get on the wrong side of TikTok because TikTok shows me something of like, there's this one rabbi who does these lives spouting really homophobic stuff. And so TikTok shows him to me, it's shown him to me multiple times. And it's like, oh yes, he's Jewish, but I'm also queer. Like you're not getting the intersectionality TikTok. Or I wonder if sometimes the algorithm shows you something that you'll get like one video just by some far right account, and they want to see if you'll keep watching it, because it's all about attention, whether you're giving a video negative or positive attention, the algorithm doesn't know. So it'll show you something, this might shock you, and you might keep just watching it out of outrage. And then but I'm always really quick to click away from those videos because I don't want to keep seeing them.
Yeah, I mean, I guess to add on to what my co-panelists have said, I also would highly recommend blocking people. I'm a big fan of using the block button when it's warranted, right? I think it's one thing for someone to disagree with what I'm saying and want to have a spirited but respectful debate. I always welcome that in my comment section. In fact, I will pin those comments and like highlight the conversation, versus someone like calling me a slur because they don't agree with me. That's a very different kind of thing. You don't know how to dialogue. And the nice thing about having a digital space that you curate is that you get to decide, you know, if I want to filter out certain comments or certain words, then I get to do that. If I want certain people not to have access to this space, I can block them or limit their access, so on and so forth. So all to say, yeah, big fan of blocking when it's warranted. You know, I also think, I guess to give like more of a personal example, it can be like, I guess a blessing and a curse to have like a certain hashtag help you reach an audience, but then unfortunately bring you to folks who don't necessarily arrive to your content with the best intention. So my mom is Black, my dad is Jewish. And so, you know, I identify as multiracial because my mom is racialized as Black, my dad is racialized as white in the world. And so in addition to talking about being Black and Jewish, I also talk a lot about multiracial experiences, plural, because there's not a single one. And so I started using the hashtag, like hashtag multiracial, hashtag mixed a lot under my videos. And on the plus side, it was so cool because I ended up connecting with all these other mixed people. And like we were talking about our lived experiences, and that was an amazing bonding moment in so many different ways. And then on the flip side, I had a lot of interesting like gatekeeping folks who ended up in my comments telling me, well, you're not really Black, or telling me like, well, you're not really Jewish, or telling me you can only identify using the language of mixed or multiracial. It's kind of this interesting thing, like when you align yourself with certain labels, albeit knowing that labels are never like complete or concrete or fully encapsulating what it is that they aim to name. I've experienced so much backlash around like the language that I use to talk about myself, which is really interesting. So how can hashtags both bring you closer to community, but also attract people who, want to dictate who you are to you? It's tough.
Yeah. I'll say I've seen people, when it gets far enough, like you like reaching out to your community, like reaching out to your friends, and like on TikTok, like make a friends only video, which is when you make a video with like that only people, like if you follow them and they also follow you, only they can see that. Which is also a great feature that TikTok has that's really important, I think, for building community that other apps don't have. And like, or I've seen people just post it on the regular page also, which is like, help, I'm on the wrong side of TikTok. Like, just like my video, like my content. If you're seeing this, you probably like this, and this. I want to get back to the community that likes this, and this. So just like pull me out of there. And I think, and that's when it gets, I think, to a point where it's like real bad. And then also like sometimes for me, this is not everyone, I recognize like that's not something that everybody can do, because I have like, something that everybody wants to do, because I talk about a whole bunch of trillion different things. Like I made a video, like a bunch of videos about core a couple months ago. Long story about what core is, but it got into a lot of like toxic masculinity stuff and like was really attracting the wrong crowd. And also the topic itself was making me depressed, literally. So it was at a certain point, I was like, kind of just shifted, like I'm just going to shift what I'm talking about for a little bit. Like I'm just going to talk more about craft for a moment and like folk art. And that helped me like swivel back also.
Right. Well, it seems like a really important thing for navigating TikTok as both a creator and a user is a good sense of online media literacy. That if you want to participate in online spaces today and really be able to protect yourself from just kind of the unmoored like maw that has opened up within like our communal psyche, you have to know a little bit about how algorithms work, how each website's algorithm's a little different. Because as Sim touched on, they're all trying to sell us something. It's no different than when we're watching cable television. It's no different than when we're listening to just standard over-the-air radio or even print media. All of those, they want to sell us something. The more eyes are on it, the more valuable their product is. But the difference is that today on every single one of these apps, we're both the product and the consumer. We're both at the same time. The more we play with it, the more value it has. But it also is something that if you know how to use that toolbox, you can find wonderful places. Let's talk a little bit more about some of those places, because Raven and Sim and Issa, you've all been talking about how you can hear directly from other people, from so many, like from your own communities, from similar backgrounds, from completely different backgrounds, and how there's basically entire networks out there of so many other people. And I know, at least for me, years and years of looking at this stuff is at specifically extremist content and thinking about how extremism has been spreading, and seeing it happen to people I know, it's horrifying. But one of the things that I think drew me to TikTok as a user was the fact that I was finally getting to see other people talking about things rather than just somebody putting a giant wall of text. That hurts my head. I can't look at that. As much as I want to, screens hurt my head after a certain point in time. But I can listen to other people from so many different backgrounds. What are some of your favorite spaces that you've seen, that you've gotten to participate in, that you've seen blossom, bloom, and become something that really should make people feel hope?
Well, I just recently, March 20th to March 27th was the Trans Rights Readathon, which we organized on TikTok. It spread to other platforms, but I don't think it would have had the explosive growth that it did on TikTok, because again, this really small, tight-knit book talk community just embraced the idea, and so many people signed up for it. And then it was able to easily spread to other platforms from there. So what this was in response to the, at this point, over 500 anti-trans bills that have been proposed in the US. All these book content creators pledged to read, and we ended up having 2,600 participants. And for 1 week, we read nothing but books by trans authors, talked about them, celebrated them. And in the process, it was a readathon. So we were fundraising for various different trans supporting organizations. And I wanted to leave it open to anyone could support their local trans youth shelter. So we ended up supporting over 250 organizations in 40 different countries. 40 people in 40 different countries participated, and we raised over $240,000. So it was like a really great, it was just like a week of like so much positivity, so much like love for these authors and these books. And we had two authors who are trans authors had their debut books that week, and they hit the top of the bestseller list despite not really being predicted to be those kinds of books. So it was really absolutely, bar none, the most positive experience of community I've ever had on the internet. It was really incredible.
That's so amazing. I didn't realize you raised like that much money. Like that's crazy. And like had that many people be a part of it. So congratulations. And that really does like show the mazel tov, as it were. It really shows like kind of what TikTok can do, like, and what is so powerful about it. And what's interesting is like I realize it's kind of the good news that we all have right now is we're saying this in the wake of like at least my thought right now is I don't think the TikTok ban bill is going to go through. I for a moment really thought it was going to happen, and there's been so much backlash that it's not. And my feeling is that obviously the people that were leading that backlash were TikTok users. And that was like, I think that's like also one of like the big showings that I've seen recently is just how brilliant so many people are on TikTok, both young and old. Like actually Gen Z makes up the minority of the people on TikTok, which is a fun fact. It's actually less than like 45%. Which is a lot, but it's like, you would think that TikTok is like exclusively Gen Z. But it was Gen Z and non-Gen Z people like reading the bill, like getting into the specifics and like drawing out like the scary stuff that like big news publications were not talking about, like some of like the really scary censorship stuff. And it got to the point where I was really happy that me and a couple other educational content creators were interviewed by Barron's to talk about what the consequences would be if this went through. So it really felt like TikTok creators were not just like getting angry, but doing it like having your citations, like having your history ready to talk about like what exactly is going to happen if TikTok is banned. And also like the way that memes were used in that time, or like videos of the TikTok CEO and and how like it was just a really interesting moment where people were just kind of putting some of their best like investigative research forward. Some misinformation definitely did get spread around that in the details that I can't get into right now, but that definitely gave me a lot of hope in a lot of ways. Like we talk about like, no one uses critical thinking anymore, like that type of thing. But I think that TikTok can often show just how many people there are out there that have the ability to put together incredible videos. And the other, like, this is a tiny, funny little thing, but like right now, if you ever watch like Wes Anderson movies, there's like a trend going around that's kind of lovely of people making edits of like their daily lives, or like celebrations of Eid were some of the best ones I think I saw recently, in the style of a Wes Anderson movie. And like, my take was just that, like, I do not like Wes Anderson. I don't like his movies. And he's like kind of racist, but the ways that, but what was really cool about this was that everybody was figuring out on their own and teaching each other how to make that style, or like how to like create that aesthetic for themselves. And it's kind of like a form of folk art where like we are all like taking that on ourselves, and like being like, oh, we are just as good at Wes Anderson. Like, it's not actually that hard to make the aesthetic that he makes. Or it is hard, but like a lot more people can do it than just him, essentially. And that's been like a really exciting thing to see.
Yeah, I mean, I think for me, I've just been really excited to see Jews of color blossoming in the digital space. You know, like obviously there are so many people who have come before us who have been carving out space for Jews of color, in a US context predominantly. I'm talking about, you know, over the last couple of decades. But in terms of the digital space, I do think that's kind of like a newer area where we're trying to carve out, you know, room to have conversations about diversity in the Jewish community as it pertains to racial identity, specifically. And yeah, I've just been really excited like to be a part of that wave, to see other Jews of color like speaking their truth and talking about their journey. And when I say Jews of color, well, not everyone, you know, agrees with that terminology. Some folks might like want to use more specific language, so I want to name that as well. But folks who arrive to their Jewish identity in so many different ways. Maybe it's folks who are converting, maybe it's folks who are patrilineal Jews, maybe it's folks who are multiracial, who, you know, et cetera, et cetera. So that's been cool to just bear witness to. And then, you know, I think another space that I've really been grateful for online is the space that I've curated and like the cool things that I've been able to do with my community. You know, I ended up doing a fundraiser for someone that I felt like really deserved like reparations from the US government, but hadn't like received those reparations. Her name is Sarah Rudolph, and she was affected by a KKK bombing of a church and just like never got any reconciliation for that from the US government. And so I was like, I'm going to take it upon myself to do something about this because this is wrong and this is fucked up and people need to know her story. So I made a TikTok and I shared it across all my platforms, and my audience and I were able to raise a ton of money to share with her. And you know, I think that's the power of the internet. It's able to bring people with shared interests together who otherwise like we may never have encountered one another, and we can do really amazing things when we don't have that barrier of like geographical distance, you know, kind of disrupting our ability to organize in a massive and an important way.
I love all of this. Yeah, I think one of the things that I've really appreciated from all of your content and a lot of other folks, your peers, I suppose, all across TikTok, is that like there's this dream of the internet that I think a lot of people have forgotten what people were dreaming, what it would be like in the 1990s, before it became enclosed, before all of these communities and spaces that were built were then cordoned off and then turned into something that you had to go and pay to get into, something that was owned by another company rather than controlled by the community, moderated by people in community spaces. And it's really beautiful seeing this, that what could be still exists in some of these places, which of course, everyone is still being harvested for data because we're still in the attention economy and all of these places are still doing that. But it's really beautiful seeing that human spirit and that spirit for community is still going through. It's really easy to feel alienated and alone, especially as we look at more screens. But as we're entering this last half hour, I would love to talk more about historical content and what topics y'all cover, or favorite things that you've learned while you've been doing this journey of research. Because for the audience, all three of these creators, if you couldn't tell, did not set out to say, I'm going to go and start talking about anti-Semitism. I'm going to go and start talking about hate groups. Not that many people really start out with that. Everyone ends up in these spaces in different ways. And then we end up learning things. It's one thing that's amazed me about everyone here is that all of you do things similar to what I do in 90-minute trainings for like an organization, but y'all are doing it better and in like 90 seconds. But the other part is that all of you have embarked on a campaign of self-education, and then turning it into a campaign of like mutual education. So I'd love to hear about what you've learned, what you're hoping to learn, and what you're hoping to continue teaching others.
What a big question. What I've learned, do you mean like what we've learned through the research that we're sharing and like the actual content that we're sharing, not what we've learned about making content?
Yeah, the actual content. We've talked enough about making content.
Okay.
I want to hear the real meat and potatoes.
You know, I got interested in this early modern period because I wanted to write this book set in the early modern period because I wanted to write a historical Jewish book. I wanted to write about my trans Jewish ancestors, and I didn't want to write about them in a genocide. Like and I had heard just somewhere, I don't remember the first time I heard it, but I had heard at some point that the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth in the early modern period was a heaven for Jews. And I was like, what? Poland was a heaven for Jews? And so I just started picking at that thread and learning about it and got really interested with this period, which I just never learned the Jewish history of this. I mean, my Jewish history was like, you know, biblical stuff, and then Germany, like 1900s to, you know, in a World War II Germany. And that was really my understanding of Jewish history. So, you know, in the pale of the settlement and the pogroms and everything, but not what came before that. Not what became before the Russians invaded the Polish-Lithuanian Commonwealth was a very different world for Jews there. So I got really interested in that and I started reading it. And then I started, you know, researching the history of the neighboring countries at this time period, and just how much the foundations of a Christian society were based in demonizing Jews. And I was also really interested in Cedric Robinson, who wrote Black Marxism, and Black anarchists, scholars working the Black radical tradition, see this time period as the development of white supremacy, and that white Christians really created the tools of white supremacy, ghettoization, you know, a captive pool of labor, social stratification, like all of these scapegoating, you know, one segment of the populace developed these strategies on Jews and Irish people in another part of Europe at this time period. And so I got really interested in that. And then all my work prior to this has been climate fiction. I'm called a climate fiction writer. But I got really interested in the origins of climate change, which another Black radical scholar, Françoise Verger, she disagrees with the term Anthropocene, which sees the start of climate change with the Industrial Revolution. But Françoise Verger says, actually, we start to see climate change in this period, this early modern period, because you have colonization going all over the world. And there was already so much ecological devastation that comes along with that, because you're replacing sustainable native agricultural food systems with European crops. You're seeing like the introduction of like water infrastructure, like dams and you know, water, like creating droughts, you know, changing the water system. So and then the introduction of invasive species. So climate change is already, and then also in this time period, Europe is running out of wood because they've cut down all their trees and they've switched to coal. So I just thought it was a really interesting time period. And Jews are really at the center of this story of how racial capitalism developed and how that is like at the roots of this climate crisis we're facing today. And all of those things seem so interested into me. And I wanted to write a novel just sort of set in that nexus of awful.
Wow, that's a whole word. And that's one of many, many, many reasons that the Black and Jewish communities should be in deep and profound solidarity with one another, right? Because the way that white supremacy is set up, it depends upon the existence and continuation of anti-Semitism and anti-Black racism. We can't get rid of one without getting rid of the other. That's such interesting and important work, Sim. I mean, yeah, I guess to kind of to add on to that, it's funny, I think we all arrive to like our work online from very different vantage points, and oftentimes, Brandon, as you noted, like what we start off doing is not necessarily what we're doing now. I know for me, that definitely wasn't the case. Like I started off making vlog type of content. Who wanted to see me vlogging? Nobody, absolutely nobody. But it was fun. I would vlog stuff about being a grad student because I thought it was super interesting that I was like in this PhD program and I wanted people to have a glimpse into that. Some people cared about it, but most people were just like, whatever, which is totally fine. But that's what I started out doing. I loved your Shabbat vlog last week. Hey, thank you. That's so funny. So that's what I started out doing. And then kind of on a whim, I think at the recommendation of my mom, actually, she was like, Raven, you're learning all this cool stuff, like in your master's program, my African-American studies master's program, like you should make a video about that stuff. And so I made one video about it. It kind of popped off. I was like, oh, I guess people like it when I talk about intellectual things. I guess I'll keep doing that. I mean, so much of building out a career on social media is just like throwing a bunch of stuff at the wall and seeing what sticks, and then whatever sticks you just do more of and you hope it'll keep sticking, and if it stops sticking then you pivot, right? It's a very interesting career path. But in terms of topics that I cover, I'm very much a theory buff. I am a product of my environment. I like talking about big lofty concepts, which I don't know, lots of debate about like how applicable theory is, but I think the theory is very powerful and very impactful. Like if we think deeply about the condition and state of the world, even in the abstract, that can have very concrete and tangible effects, right? So for example, in terms of theory, I've made a video about conditional whiteness. So thinking about the way that the Jewish community relates to this concept of whiteness, because sort of what I noticed is oftentimes when we talk about Jewish folks in US context, particularly Ashkenazi folks, there's this presumption that, oh, well, all Jewish people assimilated into whiteness, they're all white now. And so, yeah, maybe you had these hard times a couple decades ago, but y'all are good. And that is a vehicle for the dismissal of so much anti-Semitism that, as we know, is not only still existing, is on the rise. And so I made a video about this. I was like, well, that whiteness is deeply conditional. Like if anyone's wearing any religious garb, like a kippah, then suddenly you're not white anymore, you're a Jew, right? Or if you're in a synagogue or in another Jewish space, you're like all these different things make that whiteness conditional. And I felt that was a nuance that needed to be touched upon. I mean, another thing that I've spoken about too, being multiracial, I often find that people will look at my videos and they'll see me talking about the Black radical tradition or being Black or Black history. And they're like, why is this white girl talking about Blackness? And it's just this complete disregard for the fact that like one's physical appearance doesn't necessarily align with their politics and doesn't necessarily align all the time with the communities that they belong to. So depending on what time of the year it is, I may be one shade or another shade, or if I straighten my hair, I may present one way or a different way. And there is language that encapsulates this phenomenon, and I'm not the only one. And so I made a video, about being white passing versus white appearing. And people would, because people would say in my comments like, oh, well, you're white passing or you're just white. And I wanted to underline this distinction. To be white passing is an agentive thing, that is choosing to pass as white in the world, disavowing your community of color and pretending as if you are genuinely a white person. That's one very specific modality. White appearing is, well, depending on the time of the year, I might be mistaken as white, but that's not me at choosing to present in that way as an agentive act that is out of my control. My phenotypes are not something that I choose. So that's a whole long way of saying I love theory and I love talking about theory and educating on theory. Really interesting stuff to me. And then, of course, as someone who is Black and Jewish, I think a lot about what happens when communities come together, what happens across the Jewish diaspora. And so I also do a lot of research on diverse Jewish history. So talking about Kaifeng Jewish people in China, talking about Cochin Jewish people in India, talking about Ugandan Jews in Uganda, and what does it mean to think about diaspora kind of disrupting this idea of all Jews are white. I think that also helps to, curb that line of thought. To the question of like, what have I learned? I think the best teachers are always learning. And so I'm constantly researching and reading and going and looking at peer-reviewed articles. Like everything that you see come together in my videos is the result of very intentional and thoughtful research. I'm a researcher by nature. I was literally just finished my master's degree, right? Like I had to write a 60-something page thesis. So this is what I do. So yeah, I mean, I think I'm always learning as I'm teaching. And I mean, I hope to learn more about more diverse Jewish communities, or so many more communities that I want to speak on in my research. And also talking about like the intersections of Judaism and queerness. I think that's kind of a part of our story that I want to delve more deeply into. And Sim, I need to look more at your work because I know that they just be like popping off. I probably would have all the answers that I need if I just like scrolled through your TikTok for one day. I'm so serious. But yeah, there's always more work to be done, but we chip away at it every single day.
Yeah, oh my gosh, I don't know I forget if this is in the Talmud or if it's just a saying, but it's that like thing of, and it's something I have to remind myself of like all the time, is like, you know, we're not expected to finish the work, but we're not expected, but I'm not going to say it right, but we're not expected to finish the work, but we're going to keep trying until we die or something like that. I'm not eloquent like the Talmud. But I think this is like one of the very weird things about my content is that I don't really have a content plan, and I don't really I don't stick to one thing. Like I talk about a lot of different things. Like sometimes it's like about how like there's pork in products that don't always label themselves as pork, or then sometimes it's about bricks, and it's like if you follow me, I apologize, you never really know what you're gonna get. And so but one thing that that is true is that all of these threads definitely, like, they all relate to each other in a different way. It's all coming out of the same source, which is looking at like cultural norms and how they're put in place by systems like white supremacy. And so in terms of like where I got started, especially on TikTok, was this is like, it feels weird to even think about, but like I started talking about mostly textiles and German folk dress, or Tracht, and all the different regions of German folk dress. And what I started realizing, what's the really exciting part of talking about German folk dress is that what really got people into it was that it was, first of all, this very joyful thing, this very beautiful thing. And there's so many, like, and it's incredibly diverse, so many different styles of German folk dress. And so I was able to, it was a story that's still like, I feel like is the perfect type of story that I like to tell now, where it's this thing that has all of these beautiful, like, you can really appreciate the beauty of humans in a lot of ways. And also it's this story of fascism. Like, what ends up happening is that Hitler comes in, he arrives and he bans a lot of different types of German folk dress and makes a simplified version of the dirndl from Bavaria into like the German national identity. And so he definitely uses folk culture as a way of like pushing a Nazi agenda. But he also, and I was interested in looking at cultural erasure that was done through that type of white supremacy. And what was interesting is that there were all of these people that are German that felt like really ashamed to be German, just felt like they, didn't have a culture, didn't even like telling people they were German because of World War II. And we're like, holy moly, like, I didn't know there was this whole other culture, like, especially before the Nazis took power, there's all these different cultures that people are still trying to upkeep, but it's really hard. And so for like a really long time, my content was based around like diversity of culture in Europe and like just how many different cultures there are, and how they totally cross country borders. And you can start to see like why borders can be so ridiculous when you see like just how like they don't pay attention to like actual cultures at all. But what I started, one of the places I felt like I started to get pulled into was this like very like white navel gazing kind of thing, where it was like, oh, in order to combat white supremacy, we just need to like shake off our whiteness and embrace our Irishness or Germanness or Ukrainianness or something. And I was like, it started, and there's a whole, and this is like another one of those like sides of TikTok that is wild, is like the north side of TikTok, where you have all of these Nazis and then a few really, really dope people who talk about like Norse mythology from like in like an anti-fascist angle. And they have to deal with this stuff kind of all the time. And I realized this is like one of the perils of like talking about like diversity, in that of like talking about like whiteness without talking about like the current state of whiteness, of like where we are now. And so this is also like, but anyway, and this is all to say that like there are so many, one of the things that I've like learned is that there are so many ways of using a topic as like a lens through which to look at something. So like I talk about like one of my favorite things to talk about, and unfortunately TikTok has never pushed these videos in the way I want them to, but during the time that Sim was talking about, especially in the like era of prosperity for Jews in Eastern Europe, this was when like the wooden synagogues were really like became a style and became really prominent. And it's just one of the most beautiful, they're just like the most beautiful pieces of architecture I feel like I've ever seen in my life. And so one of the things that I think I've had the most rewarding experience talking about, and I was still really surprised that people were as chill about it as they were, is that I really, my distaste for contemporary Holocaust architecture, or like contemporary like Holocaust memorials, especially that like talk about how like who that sometimes like pretend like the Holocaust was just about Jews and not about other people, or it feels like, you know, for so long Jewish history is only talked about in terms of our tragedy and our death, and we don't celebrate our life as well as I want us to. And so this is, so actually the picture behind me is a recent project that's actually is a Holocaust memorial, and is I think doing it in a way that I think is much better, which emulates a Ukrainian wooden synagogue painting, and it does it in a way that kind of reinvents it and makes it into something new, and it's shown like a pop-up book. So it's this very beautiful project, but it focuses like on our joy and our life, and there's so much of that culture, similarly to how like so much German Tracht has been lost as a result of World War II. There's so much of like culture, and this is obvious, of course, like mostly in Ashkenazi spaces, that has been lost, both due to like whiteness, and people buy into it, of course, like willingly, and also due to like all but two of these synagogues like being burned down. And so it's something that like I think at the beginning of like the journey there, like I sort of took criticism as like oh my God, everybody hates me. But now I've started like, and it depends on the criticism, but like sometimes like when it comes to topics, I realize like I'm always afraid to talk about something I don't really know that much about. But what I've realized, in terms of like what I've learned the most like from my comment section. Like there's all these friends and scholars and like people that just have a piece of information. It's like, oh, I can help you. And they'll just throw it, like give it to you. It's like, they'll just help you do your research. So my favorite thing to do is always kind of like put it out there. Like, if you know more about this topic, like I want to learn more. And like, that's something that, can be a very beautiful thing when you it's helped me kind of like open up to people, like open up to the like this idea is like, oh, like, because so many people are really mean, like unnecessarily mean when they have a critique, but there are also a lot of people that are like, I think you meant this, or like, you know, this is how it's actually pronounced, or like, this is like, if you want to learn more about this, like this is my specialty. Like Sim, right before we got on, like told me about this whole world of Italian Jewish patchworking that like I never knew about. And like, that's the type of thing where I feel like I learned from my fellow content creators, that is like, it has made research into this whole kind of beautiful networky type of thing that I feel like I didn't experience in academia as much. That is kind of unique to TikTok and the internet in that way, where sometimes we help each other out. We don't always tear each other down, which is good.
All right. Well, as we're approaching our last few minutes, gosh, there were so many things that have been brought up that I wish we could keep talking about. And especially since like it was right here in the final quarter that that Raven, Sim, and Isa all started mentioning fascism and that and the importance of theory. At least at JCA, through the work that I've been doing in our book clubs, and trying to get people up to date on recent history, and also older history. One of the hard things is, what is fascism and how different is what's going on today from yesterday? So I know it's a big topic for the last 10 minutes, but I think that each of you, I've watched your content like touch on so many of the subtleties and differences in analysis that are necessary to understand today's creeping fascisms. And I'd love to hear a little bit from each of you, but I want to start with Sim first, because I've really enjoyed so much of your content lately about this topic.
Yeah, I think something that I've realized from having this conversation this week is that for a lot of people, fascism is a light switch. It's a binary on off, and they'll see what's happening with this anti-trans legislation going on, and they'll say, now the country's fascist. It's flicked on. And that means the Holocaust is inevitable. And like, there's going to be a genocide of trans people to the level of like death camps. And it's just a binary thinking. And they also conceive of genocide as sort of an on-off switch instead of something that can be centuries long. I mean, the US, in many ways, depending on who you are, the US has always been fascist and genocidal, right? Certainly if you're indigenous, this is a country that's always been fascist and genocidal. The country is now becoming genocidal, like certain states in the country are now becoming genocidal for white trans people or parents of white trans kids for the first time. And so to them, the world is ending. And some of them, what I was talking about in this video was about like my decision to stay in Houston, Texas, which first of all is not also a decision. I'm trying to tell people I can't leave. I have a kid under a custody order right now. Can't leave the state of Texas. So, there's so many people who cannot leave red states, but also there's, especially on TikTok right now, there's a lot of people who are not Southerners and who, some who are Southerners, some who are not Southerners, not trans, telling people in the South that they need to get out now or we're all going to die because Ron DeSantis is building death camps. And because Ron DeSantis, he expanded the death penalty, and that means that gas chambers are going to follow 5 seconds behind. I mean, it sounds ridiculous, but people are really believing this and kind of crying and panicking on TikTok. And last week I was just seeing video after a video like this, and as someone who is a trans Jew living in the South, it got to be really overwhelming. So I've been seeking to teach people about just how different the South is compared to the Weimar Republic. I mean, I think that I personally feel, and I am certainly a trans person who has a lot of privileges compared to other trans people. I mean, my whiteness being chief among them. I'm able to pass as not queer or trans if I really needed to. I feel like right now I can stay in Texas and continue the anti-fascist organizing that I'm doing here and make a difference. I don't think that extermination camps are inevitable. Like, I don't think that's an inevitable course that the US is on. We can continue to resist. And I got just a stunning amount of backlash from people who are really invested in this narrative of nihilism and fatalism, that the country is entirely doomed and that there's no fighting to be done. And I think because that's easy, right? If despair and fleeing is the only recourse, then you don't have to do the hard work of fighting, especially if you are someone with more privileges. more financial privilege, more racial privilege, whatever it is. So that has just been like what I've been kind of going through this week. And I think it points to just a real lack of education, but looking forwards and backwards, both at, let's look at the history of the US and just how fascist and genocidal it's been all along. And yet we're all still here. And yet progress has been made in certain areas, you know, things have been able to be changed despite it always being a fascist genocidal country. And also, let's actually develop a better understanding of what happened in the 1930s in Germany and how different that was from the US today, and how these are different events and different contexts. And you should not leap to Ron DeSantis is going to create Treblinka. Like, that's not really I don't think that's like helpful. So that's kind of what I've been trying to talk about and educate about this week.
Yeah, thank you so much for your work on that, Sim. Like, seriously, it doesn't go unappreciated. I'll tell you, like, my experience, like, I did not know at all, like, the history that you were talking about in that video, of like just the amount of like paramilitary of militia that were in the US. So like one thing that they mentioned was that like there was 10 times the amount of paramilitary just terrorizing Jews and terrorizing like other groups that were targeted than the police force in the Weimar era, like before the US. So you'd have to imagine like 10 million people here now, or sorry, the Weimar area in Germany. So in the US, you would now have to imagine 10 million people like literally murdering in broad daylight people like all the time right now. And what I think is so important about that is that, yeah, we cannot have people especially with more privilege and more power, just fleeing when there's organizing, when there's work to be done. And there's so much we can learn from those resistors in the Weimar era and during the Nazi regime. Like, there's just so much that we need to learn from them. We can't do that without actually like talking about fascism and learning about fascism. Like, one of the, especially in architecture, this is where it sometimes gets really scary, because a lot of academic artists and architects will go to the most extreme abstractions about what fascism is or what history is and that kind of thing. And so what happened, especially from like the 50s to the 70s and 80s, and Roger Griffin is a really good source to learn about this, as he's a historian of fascism and modernism, is that fascism really did lose its meaning. Like, people no longer are able to define it, and that is like currently the case now, where people hear something happen, it's like, oh, that's fascism, when sometimes it's neoliberalism, which has a lot of similarities to fascism, and a lot of overlap, but it's technically not exactly the same. It's not the same thing. It's not the same system. Like, it happened, like, for example, like it happens between different countries' borders and not within like one country, for example. And so like, it's important to, and this is something that my partner, who's Ben Fink, who does a lot of community organizing, helped me understand a lot, and like helped me a lot with this kind of history of looking at, you know, it's not, and it's like at a certain point where, especially this comes up a lot, especially in anarchist circles, with like when you're voting, it's like, I'm not going to vote, they're all fascists, which is like, they're not all technically fascists. Like, I see what you're saying, I hear you, I see what you're saying, but we definitely need to vote, especially like, anyway, and this is one of the also, one thing that this is making me think about is that one of the more difficult areas I've seen happening online, or one of the areas that has been the most difficult to get into, I feel like, has been like Black and Jewish solidarity, especially on TikTok, especially because there's so much history of hurt, and there's so much complication, and it's so difficult to tell that story of how, how anti-Blackness and anti-Semitism are interlinked, and yet they are not the same, of course, but how they are interlinked. And it's so hard to tell that story, especially in like 1 minute and 30 seconds or like 3 minutes without somebody, taking it into like a whole other era. And like, I think a whole other thing. And that way, I think we can learn, like, obviously so much from the civil rights era of like the Freedom Seder and like a lot of things that happened during that time. Not that all Jews were there for it, but some were doing some really, really good work. And it was an era that you saw the solidarity that I don't think we're seeing yet right now. And just to speak to what was it, like one of this like kind of hopeless nihilism type of things that I like I get upset sometimes when I'm like, and I understand where people are coming from. Like, I understand it comes from a place of hurt when people say like Black and Jewish solidarity isn't possible, like it's never going to happen, like we should just give up kind of thing. And it's like, I understand like where that comes from. It obviously comes from like a place where something horrible has happened, because there's a lot of terrible things that happen. But it's like what Sim was speaking to, like that place of nihilism of like, we can't do anything, we can't do cross-cultural organizing, so we just like shouldn't try and just be a naysayer from the sidelines. And I saw Ben, my partner, coming in the comments, but any organizer will know there's always going to be those. And I think I saw somebody talk about this. Actually, I think Sim, I saw you talking about this earlier today too. Was like, there's always going to be that naysayer, like coming from the sidelines being like, this can't happen. Like there's no way we can do this. And that doesn't mean that too doesn't mean that we're doomed. We can organize around hope. I just wanted my like final, I just wanted to throw in, I know I think I've probably gone through too long, but one of the things that is the most difficult, especially about educating about fascism, is that we do get censored a lot. And like when we talk, it's difficult you have to misspell fascism basically in order to talk about it, because TikTok will sometimes see the algorithm will see that you talk about Nazis or see you talk about fascism and say that, oh, you must be a Nazi, and like downplay those videos, whereas Nazis are very, very attuned at like going around those things. So they have whole other code words that are dog whistles that they can use with each other. And so that's something that just makes it really, really hard. And I know that like, it's not just that like a video won't get very many views. You might get like shadow banned, which means that like you just like don't get any attention at all for weeks or something like that. So it's a difficulty. But as you can see, the joy of learning keeps us all going. And so and once you have that fire under your butt, it's also pretty addictive and kind of hard to stop.
All right, Raven, any last thoughts? I want to make sure you have a chance to speak too. Everyone, too bad it's my birthday. I'm making you stay for a couple more minutes. Go ahead, Raven.
Oh my goodness. Well, I appreciate that. I also want to be respectful of everyone's time, especially because it's your birthday. I want you to like go eat a cupcake or something. Brandon, you gotta turn up, go out in the streets, shake some butt. Let's do it. Okay. Respectful language. Sorry, the AAVE is jumping out, but yeah, I think really my closing thoughts to this would be that folks who have a political compass that orients them towards fascism and an extreme spectrum of political ideology, like they're going to continue doing the work. They're going to continue organizing and finding more folks and recruiting more folks. And so to Sim's earlier points, we have not only like a duty, but a deep and profound Jewish responsibility to show up and combat that hate wherever we see it, whether it be in online spaces or in physical corporal spaces. And I know we talk about this value ad nauseum, but I feel that it's so resonant to this conversation. Tikkun olam, right? Tikkun olam, this idea that literally translates in Hebrew to world repair. Like, what duty do we all have as Jewish folks who may be secular, who may be religious, however you arrive to your Jewish identity? How do you understand your contribution to make the world a better place and leave it better for the people who come after us, so that maybe hopefully anti-Semitism ceases to exist, right? Like that, this is all in the service of creating a more loving and inhabitable world. And that world cannot exist if fascism is able to persist and grow. So yeah, I hope we can all take that with us.
thank you so much. Raven, Issa, Sim, we're at time. I wish we could just keep going. Like I could literally listen to all of you talk all of the time. I guess we all have the privilege of being able to do that though. So I encourage everyone here to please go check out Raven, Sim, and Issa's content. It's in a lot of the emails I've sent. I've probably blown up your inboxes the last like week or two. And I'll also be sending a recording of tonight's event to everyone later this week. Sometimes it takes a little time to process. And check out stuff. If you're finding that like Instagram or TikTok aren't spitting out content that really gels with you, I can guarantee you if you watch our panelists' content and leave some nice comments, hit the like button, hit the follow button, you will probably start to see your algorithm greatly improve, and you're probably going to find things that bring you joy. So with that, have a wonderful evening. Thank you all for being here. And yeah. Oh gosh, I'm just so excited. Thank you for sharing this evening with me. This is the best way I could have spent my birthday. I legitimately mean that. This is such a delight.
Happy